Hey guys, today's video comes from one of my favorite Star Wars content creators, the @Chat. He's still fairly new at YouTube and has a growing channel, so if you like this video, make sure to go thank him, and also you'll be doing me a favor by going over there and subscribing. @Chat also helped me with Battle of the Dreadnoughts, and is just generally a good guy. So again, please do me a favor, go check out his channel and say I sent you. Anyway, roll the intro.
Hello there, this is Nick of the @Chat filling in for EckhartsLadder today. The topic of discussion is if Luke Skywalker's exile on the planet of Ahch-To was actually due to the dark influence of Emperor Palpatine. The latest issue of Age of Rebellion featuring Luke Skywalker seems to imply this exact situation, and it's based on an experience Luke has just prior to Return of the Jedi. So let's go over what was in this comic when it comes to the Emperor and Luke, and why I believe it demonstrates Palpatine's involvement in Luke's exile. During an exchange between Darth Vader and Palpatine, it is clear that Vader has repeatedly failed his master in regards to finding young Skywalker. Sidious, unhappy with Darth Vader, decides that he will ponder over Skywalker himself. Palpatine connects to Luke through the Force and starts doing what I would call Force suggestions, or the manipulation of one's thoughts via the power of the dark side. We see the beginning of this connection when Luke senses something and ignites his blade on instinct. Eventually, Luke is idling in his X-Wing as he and another ship containing fuel for the rebellion wait to take off into hyperspace. Luke senses an incoming danger as they are waiting and alerts the Major that they need to get going. The Major wants Luke to be patient and wait for the official countdown before he takes the jump, but Luke knows they need to jump immediately. Everyone is at risk if they stay. The Major doesn't care about Luke's feelings via the Force. Meanwhile, we can see the ways Palpatine is influencing Luke's thoughts towards the Major for not heeding Luke's warning that they need to jump to hyperspace for safety. The Major and everyone else are fools to Palpatine, and I think this sentiment went through Luke's mind as well, since Palpatine is giving more of these suggestions through the Force. Palpatine knows that Luke can sense the truth of the matter. Luke is the Force user. He's the one with power. We can see Luke becoming noticeably more frustrated because he knows the Major is putting everything at risk. And finally, a Star Destroyer comes out of hyperspace and it releases a squad of TIE fighters to eliminate the rebels. Luke is noticeably in shock, knowing that this hesitation to make the jump might have cost them all their lives. The Emperor is suggesting to Luke that this disaster is all his fault for letting these normal, weak beings ignore him. Palpatine suggests through the Force that Luke is to blame for the destruction, because Luke was the only person who knew better, and still he did nothing. This pushes Luke into a spiral of intense guilt over this catastrophe, and from here, Luke begins to form a vision in his own mind, based on his emotional state. Palpatine can still sense what's going on in Luke's mind as well, and this is where I think we find the link to Luke's exile in the sequel trilogy. In this vision that Luke has, he flies past the dead bodies of his comrades as they float in the vacuum of space. We can still see that Palpatine is giving suggestions to Luke that it's all over, that he lost, and that he needs to leave the war and his failures behind. We see a planet orbited by 2 moons, which Luke has traveled to. Luke destroys his X-Wing in the raging oceans of the planet as he looks on from the cliffs above. The planet looks to be surrounded by stormy weather, and finally, Luke throws away his lightsaber and his helmet. Eventually, Luke comes across farmers gathering one last harvest before the storm season begins. In this vision, Luke stays here for the rest of his natural life, and we see the passage of time through various cells on the comic page. And oddly, this ends showing us that he had a family. Now, I believe the parallels to Ahch-To are really obvious. The planet of Ahch-To has a community of aliens that live in huts similar to the ones we see in this comic. The weather is extremely chaotic, just like we see on this other planet in Luke's vision. And the most interesting part is right in the beginning of Luke arriving on this planet in the comic. Luke sinking his X-Wing and throwing away his lightsaber is exactly what happened when we meet him on Ahch-To. Of course, it's my assumption that he also threw away his green lightsaber, but we do see him toss his father's lightsaber right over his shoulder. Regardless of how we feel about that moment in the film, it's a very strange thing to throw into this vision, since we know that Palpatine is directly involved right now in this moment with Luke, especially with his emotional state. Now, Palpatine can't force a vision into Luke's mind, as he mentioned in the comic, but he can influence his thoughts just enough for this entire vision to come to fruition, or at least he thinks. And then the vision ends as Luke snaps back to reality, still in a very real situation needing to deal with the TIE fighters and save his comrades. Palpatine's influence remains for a brief period as Luke goes to assist the Major in creating a decoy. The Emperor was attempting to make Luke fester in his rage for the Major, previously not believing in his instinct to jump to hyperspace. But to the Emperor's surprise, rather than Luke giving into his rage, Luke offers his hand to help. The Emperor expresses to himself that Luke cannot escape himself this easily. Eventually, the guilt will take over him. Now, there's also an interesting part of this comic that happens right at the end. Luke says to the Major that this is your time, which was a sentiment the Emperor expressed to Luke during Luke's vision to the unknown planet. It seems the Emperor's unknown influence on Luke has left a lasting impression. The Emperor's ultimate goal seems to get Luke out of the way, to make him run away by virtue of his own guilt. And so far, we have seen this narrative literally play out in the sequel trilogy. Luke is on Ahch-To after an event which caused him enormous guilt. Just like in the comic, Luke stays on Ahch-To till the end of his natural life. He has destroyed his X-Wing in the ocean, and essentially is back to his farming ways. He refuses to get back in the fight at all because of how much damage he believes he has caused. Now, knowing that this initial vision of Luke in exile took place just before Return of the Jedi gives some weight to believing that Palpatine is truly pulling some strings on the Skywalker family to get them out of his way, to wipe them all out, or to manipulate them. And again, this is speculation, but there seems to be enough connective tissue in both this comic and what has happened to Luke Skywalker in the sequel trilogy to make the case that Palpatine's dark side influence has been at play all along. This comic showed us how the Emperor exploited Luke's biggest weakness, which is his own guilt. And he did it to such an extent that Luke basically hallucinated the beta version of his trip to Ahch-To. With the return of Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker, after the death of Luke in The Last Jedi, I don't believe that what occurred in this comic is going to be pure coincidence. But either way, we need to wait and see what happens in the actual film. And that's it for today's video. I hope you have enjoyed my thoughts on the matter concerning Luke's vision and how Palpatine may have stoked Luke's weaknesses even after death, pushing him towards his eventual exile on the planet of Ahch-To. And I highly encourage you, unless you already own it, pick up a copy of Age of Rebellion Luke Skywalker Issue 1. It's awesome. This has been the AT-AT Chat filling in for EckhartsLadder, and may the Force be with you.